thank you all for being here today for this very important moment. I want to say a special word of thanks for being here to Robin and Charles, Jim's children. It's really wonderful that you could be here today for this. Robin and Charles. And I also want to say thank you to Robert Ellsberg, who is the editor of the book that should have been here today, but is a week behind in the press. Said I wasn't going to tell nobody. Professor Cohn's last book, but there is a flyer on the back table where if you take one and order it with that flyer, you'll get a 30% discount. I also wanted to share with you, when you go back to get that flyer, we would love you to step 2 feet to the left and sign a petition that we're gathering names for, because we plan to submit to the City of New York a proposal to change Claremont Avenue into James Cohn Avenue. And also, in terms of just formal and very important recognition, at our graduation ceremony this past May, we conferred on Dr. Cohn the status of faculty emeritus, which he now holds and will always hold in the history of Union. And today we have a very important step in that, memorializing and continuing to make alive the presence of his legacy as we unveil this portrait. In a minute, I'm going to introduce Fred Davey, who will talk about the process of this portrait coming into being. But I just want to tell you that the portrait will be hung in this hall, right across from Student Affairs. It's the place where students are most central, walking through every day. We would have hung him in a place of honor in the Social Hall or the Refectory. Both of those buildings in November are being closed for renovations, and all of those old portraits are going to the attic, but not Dr. Cohn's. His will be here in the place where we all see it every day. So I'm very pleased to introduce the Executive Vice President of Union, Fred Davey, who worked very closely with Dr. Cohn.
Thank you, Serene. Good afternoon. So one of the joys of being at Union was both to tussle with and to dine with Jim Cohn. We tussled a lot, sometimes in private, sometimes in public, but we argued about a lot of things. But we also found this sort of really enriching bond, at least for me, and I hope it was for him, around the fact that we were sort of both guys from the South, black men from the South. He's a little bit older than I am, but I'm just old enough to remember a very segregated South when it was the law, and I'm old enough to remember signs on the local amusement park saying Tuesdays reserved for colors. He knew a much more brutal South than even I did, but we had that bond. We understood it. We understood what it meant to be black men, to come out of that. We also shared the notion of faith and the power of faith and the power that faith can use to help one surmount and overcome things like vicious, deep-seated segregation based on race. And the power to do that and to live sort of happy, joy-filled, productive lives in spite and in the face of oppression. And so what we would do is generally about twice a semester over probably the last 5 or 6 years, we would go to lunch. And we would just talk. We would talk about union, and about what was working and what wasn't, and he was never hesitant to, as you would know, to tell me what he thought was working and what wasn't. But we would just talk. When he had something on his mind, he would call or say, come by. In December, I think it was, of 2017, so last December, he told me that his cancer had come back. And we talked about that, and he told me how much he was not afraid to die. And that he'd made his peace, and that he was ready whenever the time came. And we started to talk about legacy, because a couple of springs prior, we had sponsored a lecture that he gave, that actually I think was probably the basis for this book that he did. And we talked about, we had planned, we did a video, a couple of videos, that was part of a documentary series that is still underway on Black liberation theology. We had planned to video his Martin Malcolm class, but of course that was not able to happen. And then we talked about a portrait. And the intent was for Dr. Cone to sit for this portrait. But when I went to see him, I think about 10 days before he went into the hospital, on my last visit with him in his apartment, he said, I said, so how are you doing? He said, well, at one level I feel fine. He said, but I just left my doctor, and I asked her how much time I had. And she told me, I told you that the last time you saw me, it would be 3 months, and it's 3 months. And 10 days from that day, he passed away. But what we weren't able to do, we talked about the portrait, and he said he wanted to sit for it, and we actually had a date. And I asked him, I said, well, who would you like to do it? And he said, who did the Martin Luther King drawing and hanging in your office? And I told him who did it, a fellow by the name of Keith Batten. And he said, is that the same person that did Janet Walton's portrait? And I said, yeah. He said, well, let's get him. I said, okay. And I said, so can we have a photo that Keith can see, and we'll work on getting you're sitting for this. And he gave me a photo. It was a recent one. And then I said, so we're going to try to do this on May the 7th. And as many of you know, May the 7th was the day of his funeral. So, but we got it done. And it gives me, I mean, it sounds trite, but it just gives me kind of deep pleasure to have known Jim, to have known him as well as I did, to have been able to have many honest, sort of gut-wrenching conversations with him, but also conversations where we laughed and he screamed, and it was just a lot of fun. It was a real relationship, and so to then be able to pay tribute to him by seeing this project through just gives me a lot of deep meaning and great pleasure. So here we are, and if we are ready, we present to you this portrait of the Reverend Dr. James.
Wow.
Just have a moment of silence. Rest in power. I'd now like to ask Robert to come forward and say a few words about the book and other thoughts you'd like to share.
Thank you very much. Excuse me if I wrote some things down to forget. It's really an honor to be here in this place that was, hold it like that, there. This place that was James Cone's home and community for almost 50 years. I know how much he meant to you. And I hope you have some sense of what union meant to him. His new book said I wasn't going to tell nobody, his memoir. He's dedicated to union. And I think if you read it, and I hope you will, you'll find that it's really a sustained love letter to this community. I had suggested it really ought to have a subtitle. I'm not going to know what that means. Said I wasn't going to tell nobody. I said it should be called The Making of a Black Theologian. And that was one of our final tussles. He said, well, James Baldwin's book doesn't have any subtitle or anything like that. People be curious, what does that mean? He said I wasn't going to tell nobody. Anyway, that's what's hard to search for on Amazon. So the compromise was that the subtitle appears on the title page, but not on He's good with that. I know there's probably not a student here who hasn't read his books. Many of you studied with him, and I know that encounter will be one of the formative experiences in your life. I was also a student, although I was never enrolled in a class here, and I didn't really study theology with him. I was really privileged to participate in a 30-year-long symposium or tutorial on the subject of James Cone. Over all those years, we would meet regularly, usually over lunch. In later years, beginning in his apartment with a kind of business conversation, and then on to lunch. And we didn't really talk about his books so much. We didn't really talk about theology so much as we talked about him, or at least he talked about himself. And I don't mean that in a narcissistic kind of way. But I think that over all those years, he wanted to share with me who he was, what was important to him, why he wrote theology. And looking back, I can say that he was in a way preparing me. He was teaching me to be the editor that I could be, or that I had to be, to work with him on his final and most personal books. Let me just tell you about some of the things that he talked to me about, and you'll be familiar to you. He talked a lot about where he came from, about what it was like growing up in Bearden, Arkansas, the era of Jim Crow, and about his parents and what they gave to him, the love. He always said, I knew I felt I was loved. That was so important, the foundation of his work. But he also learned about courage and self-reliance and self-respect and dignity. And what it enabled people like his parents, people who didn't really have a big voice in this world, to be able to struggle and to survive and to overcome the obstacles of a society that counted them as being of no account at all. He carried those things with him. He talked to me a lot about how he found his theological voice, and that's a lot of what this book is about. The people along the way who helped him, the teachers, the mentors, people like C. Eric Lincoln, how important it was that certain people came along at a certain point, the right time in his life, to encourage him, to make him feel that he was important, that he was worthy, that he was capable of great things. But also about the obstacles he faced, the critics, the doubters, a lot of them motivated by racism, who were constantly doubting his capacities and encouraging him, therefore, to try harder, to do his best and to prove them wrong. He wanted me to know that his theology didn't just come out of the library, academic study, but it also didn't come out of just anger. It also came out of love. And that's a side of him that I'm not sure everybody was so aware of who read his books. His early books in particular, people write about this angry young black theologian and that sort of thing. Well, yes, he was angry. But it was not really the anger that made him write theology. It was really the love. the love for the people that he came from, love for the black community, the love for the whole tradition that he was an heir to, of enslaved and oppressed people who took unbearable circumstances that denied their humanity, and somehow found the liberating, life-affirming message of the cross. And they passed that along, not just in the gospel music and not just in church, but in the blues and the spirituals and jazz and so many other kinds of ways. And he wanted to remain rooted in that. It was the experience of what was happening in the streets in the late 60s, early 70s, that motivated his theology. That's where he came from. That is what made him James Cone, the founder of Black theology. He was also a teacher, and you know him that way. I think that was profoundly important to him. He wanted to encourage his students to be their best, not to be Cone clones or disciples, but to find their own voice, and to find what was that motivated them. It didn't have to be what motivated him, what caused them pain, where the pain in their hearts was, where the joy in their hearts were, what their hopes were, what their desires, what they cared about. That's what theology should be rooted in. And if it's not rooted in that, it's an academic exercise, ultimately not important. He learned from his students, and he writes a whole chapter about that in his memoir, about how the process of working with students in his classroom helped to shape his own theology. He pays particular tribute to Dolores Williams, one of his wrestling partners, how womanist theology expanded his horizons, and how the questions and the challenges that Dolores raised about the atonement and the power of the cross actually inspired him to write The Cross and Lynching Tree. It was his answer, in a way, the answer that he had to write to the questions that she was raising. He believed in the importance of mentoring a new generation. He knew that his work would be sterile if it wasn't passed along. And he invested a lot of effort into raising up generations of young scholars, not just black, not just men, women, white students of all colors, all backgrounds, and he took pride in their achievement. He also was, I think, a brilliant mentor to many doctoral students in making clear to them they shouldn't just be writing for an audience of 5 people. He had an amazing track record in mentoring publishable dissertations. Many of them I published in one of his books, including Kelly Brown Douglas 25 years ago. It's how far we go back, and it's one of my incredible things. I'm grateful to James Cone for that introduction. He also worried, though, that black theology not become just an academic subject. He didn't want students to be hung up about status and tenure and security. Those things had never motivated him. And it's amazing when you read his memoir, the kind of courage and well, you know, just like he didn't care. He didn't care. He did what he thought was important. And when people thought of it or they criticized him, that was all fine. But he never tempered his message for security or for the sake of getting ahead. And he wanted the same for his students. I'll just add a few personal words. I have been at Orbis for now 31 of the 50 years of Orbis. I inherited James Cone in 1987. We had reprinted some of his early books when I first came there, and I stepped into the role as editor-in-chief. And for a lot of years, I think he had a lot of deep suspicion about me, and whether a white editor could really understand, care about what he was doing. I remember one time he said, you don't care about my work, you just care about Orbis, that's what's important to you. And I think a low point really came over lunch. I didn't finish my meal, where he said that I was the most difficult white man he had ever worked with. And it was a very devastating kind of thing. In retrospect, I wondered if it was almost a test, whether he wanted to see how I would respond to that, whether I would just get up and walk away, or come back for more. And I'm glad I did come back. I would prefer to have his books and his respect. But if it really came down to a choice, no question I would go for his respect. I got a beautiful letter back from him. And I won't say everything changed overnight, but it was the beginning of a different relationship in our journey. And the crossing the lynching tree didn't just come the next year, it was like 10 years later. There was a lot more to that symposium of Jim Cone that I had to experience and had to learn from. And finally, he gave it to me, and I worked on that. I gave it everything I could. He was very happy. And we broke through to a different level. It was not about trust anymore, it was about love. And I just loved that man. And I would have done anything for him. And it gave me so much satisfaction to see the reception of that book, and to see that the book that I think was the kind of most personal of all of his work up till then, it came right out of the pain of his life in a very explicit way, that it was recognized. Even, just the weeks before he died, he was awarded the Gravemeyer Award. The best book in religion. You have 5 years to nominate that book, and I just kept nominating it over and over and over again. And the fifth time it took, and just in time, I was so glad that he spoke about how much it meant to him, the reception when he traveled, and the people who said what an important book that was. And here's a guy who's writing, 50 years, and we're about to do a 50th anniversary edition of Black Theology and Black Power. It was published in 1969. A lot of theology students here. Of course, we read Barth, and we go back and read Telek, and we read, the classics. They're very hard to find a book of theology written 50 years ago that still speaks with that kind of searing relevance to today. And I think in the whole, the Black Lives Matter uprising of the last couple of years, new people, a whole new generation were discovering his books and even marching with, signs that said, James Cone was right, hashtag or whatever. He was finding a new audience. I think it really meant a lot to him. But finally, it came time for his last book. I think without us even saying so, I knew that this was the final word. And he said so. He said, this is going to be my last book. I want it to be good. I want you to use your finest skills, the Godfather says. And it was an honor. And it was more than that. It was a sacred task to work on something that was as important as that. And one of the last times we spoke was I sent him the cover. Actually, we met. Before that was the last time. I guess I didn't know it was going to be the last time we spoke. The book was done, and I said, I'm a better man and a better editor. I said, no, you didn't. And he just said, Robert, I've enjoyed our conversations. That was the last time we spoke.
Well, there are no better words to hear. There are no better words to hear than the words of James Cone.
Amen.
This reading comes from his memoir, of course, from the chapter, Couldn't Keep It to Myself, Removing My Mask. May I do them justice? Excuse me. For about a year after joining the faculty at Adrian College, I had done what was expected of a Negro. But then Detroit exploded, and so did I. My explosion shook me at the core of my racial identity, killing the Negro in me and resurrecting my black self. I felt a black fire burning inside me, so hot I couldn't control it any longer. Yet I had to be careful to keep my rage from exploding among my white colleagues and friends. I withdrew and kept to myself, lamenting over the 43 dead after 5 days of Black rebellion. But I had to find a way to let it out, to express what I was feeling about blackness and whiteness, race and theology. That was when I knew I had to write, to let the world know what was stirring in me, or lose my sanity. In churches and the news media, white ministers and politicians condemned Black power as hate speech. They denounced urban uprisings as the work of Negro thugs enraged in a criminal activity. Many Negro ministers and civil rights activists agreed. I reacted the same way as James Baldwin, whom I'd read since graduate school. Who is looting whom? Grabbing off the TV set. He doesn't really want the TV set. He's saying, screw you. He wants to let you know he's there. You are accusing a captive population who's been robbed of everything. I think it's obscene. Martin Luther King Jr. was greatly disturbed about unrest in the cities and the rhetoric of Black power, which reminded him of the violent language of Malcolm X. I did not share King's views. Black power expressed what I had been feeling from the time Stokely Carmichael first shouted the phrase in Mississippi in June 1966. Though it challenged King's nonviolent philosophy, I never thought of Black power in terms of violence and hate. Rather, it expressed the necessity of Black people asserting their dignity in the face of 350 years of white supremacy. Black power simply meant that Negroes were tired of being exploited and humiliated. As a theologian, I felt compelled to write a manifesto to white churches announcing that Negroes could no longer tolerate the violation of their dignity. I had to give voice to the feelings of rage in the Negro community, and especially the rage inside of me. I began rereading Malcolm X for a deeper understanding of Black power as the response to Black self-hate. Malcolm X revolutionized my consciousness, transforming me from a Negro theologian to a Black theologian, angry and ready to do battle with white theologians. My newfound Blackness impelled me to write, to let the world know that a new voice had arrived on the theological scene. I didn't know I could write. I had never written anything except academic papers about European theologians in graduate school. Black power, however, was not an academic issue. It was an existential issue about Black dignity, the political liberation of Black people from white oppression by any means necessary, as Malcolm X had said. Writing about Black power was different from writing about European theologians. For me, nothing was at stake in European theology. Didn't matter whether Barth or Harnack was right in their debate about the meaning of Revelation. I wasn't ready to risk my life for that. Hear him say that? Now with Black power, everything was at stake. The affirmation of Black humanity in a white supremacist world. I was ready to die for Black dignity.
Teaching is profoundly connected with love. Without love for one's students, it is impossible to teach effectively. Such love is not emotional bosh, as Martin King often said. Reply to people who question whether it was practical to love one's enemy. Following King, Baldwin reminded Americans that love is a battle. Love is war. Love is growing up. As a teacher, I've had to be willing to struggle with my students, and they with me. And through our battle with each other, we both could grow up. teaching each other to become the best human beings we could be. Love is always a two-way street. We have to make each other see what we wouldn't see without each other. Love is a battle because we often don't want to see what someone is trying to make us see. Jesus was trying to make people see the coming of God's justice. Those who refused to see it crucified. Malcolm was trying to make Negroes and whites see the beauty and humanity of blackness. And those who refused to see it killed him. King was trying to make the world see that peace can be achieved only through nonviolence, and violent people assassinated him. Prophets are often killed for speaking a truth people don't want to hear. Systematic Theology 103, Foundations in Christian Theology, became my signature course at Union. I put my mind and heart, body and soul into it because it was a course taken by most students during their first semester. I wanted to show them that theology matters, that it's not merely an academic requirement, but an intellectual and spiritual search for ultimate meaning in their lives. We read about Augustine's search in his Confessions and Malcolm's in his autobiography. We all searching for meaning. That is why people came to Union and why I teach you. Some, like Augustine, will find meaning in Christian faith, the focus of my course. But others, like Malcolm, will find it in Islam, and still others in other faith traditions. As Mircea Eliade wrote, life is not possible without an opening toward the transcendent. Human beings cannot live in chaos. Once contact with the transcendent is lost, existence in the world ceases to be possible.
So thank you, all of you, for those readings. Thank you, Robert and Charles, for being here. Robert, for all of those years of work. Fred, for getting a picture to reflect his wishes. And thanks to all of you for coming today. It is, yes, don't forget to sign the petition. Always an organizer over here. Don't forget to sign the petition before you leave. And remember that we are the community that carries that legacy forward.